So hi everyone, morning, evening, depending on where you are. My name is Melanie Hapisu. Thank you so much for joining in on this call. I will be your moderator stroke contributor for the day. For those of you who are new here, this is an event brought through our WhatsApp communities. And this was just one of the suggestions that people wanted to hear about. So I welcome you to today's session. I am the founder of a digital marketing agency called DigiPath Africa, where we work with brands to, help them make the best out of their digital marketing and eventually generate as many leads as possible. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. With me, I have 3 other friends of mine who are going to be speaking around this conversation. And just for purposes of keeping up with time, I'll introduce them briefly. So we have Claire here with us. Claire is currently an account manager at Social Meds Digital Limited, which is an agency here in Nairobi, providing different services. She has different skills, when it comes to digital marketing, client relations, strategy, content creation, and brand building. And I'm looking forward to seeing how the conversation goes today. In addition to that, something interesting about Claire is she's a hip hop head and a mommy of 2. So that's Claire. Then we also have Patience on the call, who is a digital media strategist, and Patience has experience in different areas around this space. She's devoted to providing outstanding support through the different tasks that she does. And I'm also looking forward to seeing how that conversation will go, considering that she has a skill, or rather has a background in, coordinating admin work. So you can imagine that entails a lot. So looking forward to seeing how that conversation will go. Thank you so much, Patience, for being here. Then lastly, we have Anne Nyokabi, who is a digital marketer who specializes in social media marketing and management. And she works with different business owners to just help them strategically position their businesses in the online space. So welcome to everyone who's joined in. I think I'll just give a minute or so for my speakers to say a quick hello, and maybe one thing they're looking forward to in as much as they're delivering this session, one thing they're looking forward to when it comes to this session. I think we can start with Anne, then Patience, then Claire.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this conversation, and thank you, Melanie, for connecting us together. As she introduced me, I'll not repeat it. I'm looking forward to an interactive session, and yeah, let's do this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Patience?
I'm happy to be here. I'm expecting us to have an engaging session where everyone gets to speak and share their opinions on unrealistic client expectations. And so I'm looking forward to an engaging session where everyone is going to speak and let brainstorm and share.
Great, thanks, Patience. Your audio is a bit shaky. Sounds like your mic is moving. Maybe you can check on that as we go. Lastly, Claire, say hello to your people.
Hi, everybody. Very excited to be here. It's my first webinar or forum in a very long time. So I'm happy to share the experiences and what I've learned. And I'm looking forward to just an interactive session and having conversations. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So for those who just joined in, welcome. We just began, and we're starting off this conversation around managing unrealistic client expectations. I know each of us has probably been in a situation like that, and we could talk forever around this. But today's session is just around sharing, giving our experiences from different perspectives. Feel free to contribute. either in the chat or at some point we'll allow people to raise their hands and join into the conversation. But I think for now, we will just get started. So I have a set of questions I'll ask my panelists tonight. It will be more conversational, so trust me, we're going to have a good time. And so I'll just kick off with that. So first question, maybe we can do a round of comments from each of the speakers. How do you identify and define unrealistic client expectations from the onset of a project? And maybe before we even kick off, I think we'll just use, the same order that we started off with. We'll do Anne, then Patience, then Claire for this first question. But maybe as we do that, I think for me, the first thing that helps me identify a client who's probably going to be having unrealistic expectations, in as much as it sounds so wide and bad, is clients who do not know what they want. They're neither here or there. And I'm sure a lot of that is going to come out from the conversation today. And maybe let's start with you. How do you personally identify this when it comes to clients?
You've already identified one of them. It is when a client doesn't know what they want. But for me, it's one of the major things that I note a client has unrealistic expectations is when during the call, sorry, there are things that they will mention that you clearly feel it will be troublesome. I'll give an example of one personal experience is when there's a client who called me and they told me, how are you going to make me have 1,000 followers in 1 week? And from then, I knew straight on if I was to take up that client. After 1 week, the client was to ask me where are the 1,000 followers. And you see, in the digital marketing space, your work is not to get a client very many followers. As we say, digital marketers are not magicians. So the first way of identifying a problematic client is through their demands, what they say they want. So that's an example of one.
Great.
Yes, Melanie.
Thanks for that. Patience, let's hear a bit from you. How do you identify?
Me, I think how I know client has unrealistic expectations is when sometimes, once in a while you encounter people who they know what they want, but they know it vaguely. So if it's about their socials, they'll give you a ton of tasks to do. And in the middle of all that, yes, the tasks are there, but there's no clear objective from all that. You don't know where to start. You don't even know what their mission, their vision is with the whole thing. For me, that one is always a telltale sign that a client has unrealistic expectations. And a lot of the times, they're the ones with so many tasks at hand. They will overload you on the first go. And for me, that one is always a red flag. That's my way of telling that that's probably a problematic client.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. I love that you've even called it a red flag, because sometimes I think as marketers, we really tend to ignore some of those things, yet you accepted it from the very beginning. So when the client starts being stubborn much later, you're shocked, and yet these are some of the things you identified. Nice. Claire, a little bit from you?
So it's interesting that Patience and Anne have talked about one of the things that I would have raised. And then I'd also say that when you see that they don't understand the scope of what they want, because in every relationship you undertake, you start by saying, I want ABCD to be done, or I want ABCD to be able to achieve XYZ. So you'll always find that clients who have unrealistic expectations, they don't know the scope of what they want. And also, there's always that innuendo of scope creep. If scope creep was a person, I think the three of us, Patience, Anne, and myself, have described what that client would be.
And I love that you brought up scope of work, Claire. You know, allow me to poke you kidogo. I mean, assuming we bumped into this client, they don't understand scope of work, you know, how do we then readjust? How do we then sort of manage to reset or bring ourselves to the same page to have sort of a realistic set of expectations with the client as well?
I'll give an example. I once had a client who would do a meeting for 1 hour, and that client would speak and speak and speak the entire hour. So I came to learn thereafter from somebody who was above me that she expects you to take in everything that she has said and then frame them in the scope of work that would work for her. So I also got to learn early on, it's that I have to trust my skill set to be able to try and decipher what the client wants. If they don't know what they want and I have somewhat an idea of a direction, give that direction and still see that we're not moving ahead or we're not making any strides forward, then now that becomes unrealistic and you go to back to square one. Then also just giving that allowance in terms of going back to square one. How many times can you go back to square one? You know, and being firm about it and saying, okay, you want 1,000 followers in 1 week, but as one of our panelists has said, digital marketers are not magicians. So you can actually then come back and redefine and say, in 1 week, this is what I can manage to give you. And these are estimates or these are the KPIs. So also just being able to limit those reverts. How many times can you do this? And in terms of scope, being very, very, very clear about what the expectation is. It's not theoretical. And that is the best thing about digital. We always are able to attach numbers in one way or another to it, or are able to attach, even if you're not very specific, you're able to attach sentiments, and you can always show evidence of what it is that you can achieve.
Nice. Those were many varies. I love it. And I love that you brought the whole conversation around limiting. So we'll talk about limiting in a few. But let me go back to Anne. Anne, I know you train people around this space when it comes to social media marketing. And I mean, I'm curious to know this whole thing of helping clients to reset or align the expectations they have when it comes to working together. Do you sometimes find yourself having to teach clients about social media marketing just to realign those expectations? Maybe tell us a bit around that.
For one thing with marketing, one thing I really try is not to give the client high expectations. I'd rather give very low expectations and over deliver. So that's one of the ways to curb that, having clients who are over expectant of what you'll deliver. Then something else is the clients might not be really interested in the nitty-gritties of what digital marketing is, but you can explain to them once in a while. Like whenever you're having your meetings, you can explain to them why you did this instead of this, why you decided to post this on the stories and not on the feed. With time, you get that they understand. I'll give a lot of examples because that's in the field I'm in, personal examples. For example, you'll find my clients, some of them when we started, they were so green in the digital marketing space. But right now, some of them, they're the ones who send me content. Like, Anne, I shot this. and they send to you, and it makes you so happy because you cannot be in a client's place all the time. So when something happens and they send you that, they now understand the importance of certain things. They understand the importance of testimonials. They understand the importance of sharing things on the social media space. So with time, they understand that, and they also can understand why some of the expectations they had were not able to be met. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. I mean, I find myself teaching quite a bit of my clients, at least the basics to avoid accidents ahead. But of course, over time, then target audience for my business has changed quite a bit. And the easiest way I've found, to avoid some of these clients with unrealistic expectations is by, just avoiding the red flags from the beginning, which we'll talk about in a bit. Patience mentioned that. And for me, avoiding red flags then has looked like, creating an onboarding form right before we have a discovery call with a client, so that if there are some questions that cannot be answered, then, definitely we're not a fit. I used to laugh at people who used to ask clients what's their budget, but right now I get it, I fully get it. In fact, I've gotten to a place where I disclose my prices. So if you do not fit within that price range, then you are probably not my target audience. It may sound bad, but that has worked well to sort of reduce, the amount of clients I had who wanted the world on a small budget, and many other red flags. Speaking of red flags, thanks, Anne. Let's go back to patience. How then, do you avoid some of these, red flags? How do you set boundaries as a marketer? How do you set limitations? Or even how do you communicate that, no, you're a red flag, without really ruining that relationship you're sort of starting off with a client?
Okay, so about the expectations, I think before even we carry on with the conversation, it's important to know what the different types of customer expectations are. First, there are these explicit expectations. These are the must-haves from the customer's side. Simply put, this is what is in the customer's mind before making a purchase decision or before even hiring someone for services. Examples of this include the price, the quality, and the delivery time. Number two, there are some implicit customer expectations. These are the basic assumptions a customer has, say, when hiring you for a service. These ones, the clients don't consciously define them, but they still have them. This can be based off on what the clients have heard from people about you, or your online presence, or their experiences with similar professionals, that is. And then number three, we have interpersonal expectations. These are expectations from your interactions, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's on, say, a session like this, and many other platforms. And some of these expectations, a client can gauge them through communication, response speed, and the quality of the interaction, basically. And then number four, we have their digital expectations. And their digital expectations, they can get this maybe from your website. If you're a service provider and you have a website, they can check your website, your mobile apps, your web portals, and then start having certain expectations based off on what you've portrayed online. Then maybe the last one, these are the dynamic performance expectations. This is how your service is expected to change over time. And this can be based on the market changes or what your competition is doing. So to identify these expectations, so I can manage to gauge whether they are realistic or not. First, I try and seek information. Like Melanie has said, she has an onboarding form, which I think is a very great idea. This helps us through questions, through surveys, you gather information and then you get to know whether someone is a good fit or not. And then also you can check their priorities. One, if this is not available, then that one clearly is a red flag, because for when a client is reaching out to you for your services, they should know exactly where you're starting from. Are we first building a website? Are we first enhancing the socials? And if that is not the case, or maybe, as Claire said, maybe they want a certain number of followers within a certain period, and that is impossible because we are not magicians, then that again is another way to tell these unrealistic things. And then another thing is transparency. If you can do something, if you've listed something as a service provider, say on your site, you should make sure you can deliver on that. You know, at times in the digital space, because everyone these days is almost into digital marketing, it's the new in thing. So maybe you can say you're a digital marketer, you can do all the services within digital marketing, but the truth is there's always an area maybe that you've not really perfected. Let me call it perfection. I don't want to call it you've not known your way around. Say you've not perfected your skills in that. So one way to avoid all these unrealistic things, this back and forth, is to just be transparent. If something can be done, you can be clear that that can be done. If it can't, you can quickly say that you can't. Like Melanie says, these days she's able to pick out those she can work with based on if they're within the budget or her pricing. So there's that. And then number 3 is the handling of how things are. Maybe a client is reaching out to you at odd hours, or maybe they're constantly complaining. Then just all these things can help you gauge as a digital marketer how things are going to pan out. You know, like we said, sometimes you can ignore these things in the first interactions, and then later they come back to bite you. So maybe there's that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Patience. I love that you've talked about just, continuously checking in and seeing that everything is going or, coming out as planned. And I know for someone like Claire, constant check-ins with clients is a big thing. But Claire, where do we draw the line? How much is too much checking in, or what's the limit? My ad went up today and I'm, busy calling you today and telling you there are no sales, or I'm busy calling you at 9 p.m. Claire, how much is too much of checking in, both from the client side and from the marketer side?
That's a very interesting question. So when it comes to check-ins, in client service, it's important for you to establish your ways of working. I'll give a practical example of how I go about it with some, if not all, of my clients. On being added onto the account, the first thing I always do is ask for a physical meeting. And in this physical meeting, usually it's not even about the work really. It's just to get to meet the team or the person on this other end, and have discussions or have conversations around your ways of working. And the first thing for me that I have always noticed is body language. You are able to tell somebody's body language when you're in a room. You can tell that, oh, we can have this type of conversation, or we can have this type of conversation. Definitely on the boundary of work, and then you will get to see and learn which innuendos are there. Sorry.
No problem. As we wait for Claire, quite interesting that Claire has mentioned physical meetings there. I know most of us marketers despise them, me included. I run a virtual agency, but what Claire has just come from saying, body language is something quite critical. Most of us attend meetings, don't put on videos. For those of you who joined in, I make it a practice to put on my video during introduction, just, for to be able to put a face to a name. But you find that sometimes there are some cues you may miss out that you may actually get from a physical meeting, and I also think sometimes physical meetings are much longer than an online one would be. So sometimes you get so much value and so much information during that meeting, just because most of us have this whole idea of an online meeting needs to be short and we get done with it. I know there are people who have that same rule for physical, but sometimes I find those are a few of the benefits that come from there, but not to say, that you can't work as flexibly as you'd like. I mean, Claire will tell us more. But I'm very sure that depending on what your goal is at the end of it all, you may decide to either, do a meeting face-to-face or do it online. You may also decide your check-ins are not as often as other people would have them. Maybe for you, it's bi-weekly. I remember when I started my career, my clients would really insist on bi-weekly meetings. But as I've grown, most of them we do bi-weekly, others we do monthly. I even have one client who does quarterly. And so for some clients, then if it's working, I mean, why are we really changing and arguing about so much of that? So thanks for bringing that out, Claire. I can see Anne, you're unmuted. I don't know if you'd like to say something. If not, Claire, if you're back, maybe you can take over.
Yes, thank you. As I said, I'm a mommy of two, so one decided to interrupt the session. Apologies for that. So physical check-ins, and then also, reading body language. And then another thing that I like to do is I'm usually very clear on my hours of working. So I will tell a client, please feel free to call me, text me, email me between this time and this time. If it's urgent, please call. If I don't pick up, then drop a message or an email. Another thing that I found very helpful, even with those check-ins, in learning how to manage clients, is that take interest in the little things that clients perhaps may not expect you to. So, for example, I'll just give a personal example. If a child is ill, ask, oh, how is the baby doing? Are you better? If they're getting maybe frustrated at work, just creating an environment where feedback from the client becomes a little more forthcoming, as opposed to you in client service poking. So I found that very helpful. So physical meetings, constantly checking in within work hours, and then also just taking note of those little things that are of interest to the client, to be able to provide a setting where they can let loose and give you feedback or give you information more than you would expect on a very serious basis.
Great. Thank you for that. I mean, the little things count. And I think something that's not so little that people like to downplay would be contracts, which I think is a good way sometimes, of setting clear expectations. Maybe we can hear a bit from Anne. Contracts. How are you feeling, Anne, about contracts?
I am so glad that you brought the topic of contracts. And in continuation to what you were speaking about, a contract is very critical because it defines the scope of work that you're supposed to do. For example, are you doing 3 posts a week? Are you doing 1 post every day? Are you doing 2 posts every day? Are you managing 3 platforms? Are you managing 4? Are you doing email marketing, digital marketing, SEO? A contract helps define this. Something else that a contract is very vital about is also the working hours, because in a case tomorrow the client texts you at midnight and you respond the following day at 8 a.m. and then they start saying you're not responsive, all those things, you're able to pin it back to the contract and say our working hours are from 8 to 5 p.m. So out of that, I also have another life or some things I'm involved in. Then the contract is also, in this day and age, something to do with payment. It also shows that you are in a contractual agreement, that you're working with the client. In case of anything, tomorrow, if something happens, okay, I don't know what might happen because I've never had to go back and refer to my contract. For example, if things like payment, the client declines to pay you, and then you go, it makes you go to court or through a legal system. I think one of the things a lawyer will ask you is, did you have a contract? And if you didn't have, there's no case. That is one mistake I did when I was starting. And it even went to the extent of me getting a demand letter to the client. But you see, they had not signed a contract. So if tomorrow they say that I was not working with you, and how will you prove, despite just sending screenshots that you posted this, but they didn't sign a contract? So that is when I learned my lesson. And since then, I have a contract for every client, but fortunately, I've never had to refer back to it. But that's what I can say about a contract. Please never start any work with a client without a contract. If you need help, there are lawyers who can help you draft it, or you can get samples of them online. I'm sure Melanie can also assist on that. Yeah, so that's it on contract from me.
Great. I totally agree. My rule is never work without a contract. And not just not work, never work without a signed contract. Because sometimes you'll be zungushwa, they won't sign the contract, and then they'll never sign it. So I definitely totally agree with that. If you think you've met clients who have unrealistic expectations, try working with those ones who don't even sign a contract. They don't want to, or they, don't believe in contracts. It's honestly going to get a lot worse. And I mean, even as we talk about all this, you'll notice that sometimes you'll start off well with a client, then mid-project, they sort of change their mind and have these unrealistic expectations. Or you realize that maybe at some point, maybe you start seeing, we're not on the same page. Maybe they're just not getting it. A good example I gave when we started was when it comes to ads. Clients imagine that if you set the ad today, they are making sales. They don't understand how that paid advert works in the back end. They don't want to know that it goes through a learning process. It has to be shown to a couple of people. The algorithm has to figure out who else it needs to show. So sometimes you realize later, when you've already started working with a client, you now have to start explaining from scratch. This is what I meant, because all of a sudden everything is looking so complex. And I mean, Patience, if you can allow me to come back to you, I'd love to know when it comes to such a scenario, especially where you have a contract, you've signed with a client, you agreed on ABC, and they want to add on, EFGH without necessarily editing the contract or without even giving a care around what you agreed on. What would you advise people to do? What steps can we take, or how can we approach this conversation overall?
That's quite simple because, first off, as you said, never begin work without a formal contract, because this will caution you from a lot of this back and forth, and it will just, even in your mind after signing a contract, or when a contract is presented to you, you're able to gauge, is this client going to have these unrealistic expectations? I think a contract is very helpful. And maybe maybe I can list the things always look out for on a contract. Number one is pricing. First, I need to confirm whether the price is going to be project-based or it's going to be a fee for service. And if this is not listed in a contract, then you should always raise an alarm. If this is not discussed, they just agree maybe they're going to pay you this amount, but you've not even discussed on the days. Maybe one of the things that can prevent all these other issues that emerge later on is to first just check on the contract if there is an agreement about pricing. And then number two is maybe about intellectual property. Do you want maybe to be acknowledged that you say, write some blogs or whatever maybe. And one of these things that is very important is the whole conversation about intellectual property in contracts. This is another thing to look out for. And just know from the onset, can you take a lot of digital marketers these days, you want to showcase the clients you've worked with, you want to put it on your website, you want to maybe list some of these things that you have done with so and so. That is another thing to look out for in a contract, and it's very important. And it's a good discussion to have even before you begin work, because it's going to save you a lot of trouble. And then number 3 is this follow-up session. First, we've talked about communicating with the clients, updating them constantly or based on whatever times of engagement. But one big thing that many people don't know, there's someone who talked about maybe you could under promise and then over deliver, something in those lines. But the truth is, in the digital space, it's better just to have everything first written out, because then you won't. And also, one thing that a lot of people forget when even seeking out these contracts is that you can manage beforehand, because the contracts are handed to you before you begin work. You can manage to negotiate some of these terms and tuck them up to your advantage, because some of these clients might be wanting maybe, as we've seen, so much for so little, or maybe they've not even listed some of these important things. So yeah, and then this enables you also to have legal follow-up. Like one of us mentioned, there's someone they worked with and then they had to even go towards issuing them a demand notice. And I think contracts in general are so important. They should always be discussed before beginning any work whatsoever. And make sure you've gone through all the important things, those things that matter to you, you voice them, make sure they are well known, and then now you can start the work. For me, that is how maybe I can prevent all this back and forth and all these other things that come from not having a clear contract.
Great, thank you. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of being honest, being clear, communicating enough with your clients. I'm hearing a lot of being flexible to adjust, even when, things change along the way. I'm hearing a lot of, if they're not in line with what you're doing, don't be afraid to say no, something that a lot of us are quite afraid of. But something very interesting that I'd love to hear, from the people who are contributing to this conversation. Where do we then start? Assuming I'm an upcoming social media manager or someone even just in this digital space, and I'd love to figure out how then can I manage and ensure that my clients' expectations are always as realistic as possible. What would you recommend? Are there templates? Are there, critical questions that I should ask? Is there a specific way around how I should communicate to a client for them to actually understand this is what is actually the expected output when it comes to this project? Maybe we can hear a bit from Claire.
Thank you, Melanie. So I'd say in terms of making sure that there are tools, frameworks for you to, manage and have realistic expectations, and also to be able to adapt and be flexible. One of the things that I've found very helpful is templates and trackers that give full visibility and disclosure to clients. Another thing that I have found very helpful is benchmarking on other projects. It doesn't necessarily have to be a project that you may have undertaken. It could be a project, maybe somebody in a similar space has undertaken. And that's where I always emphasize it's important to have friends, Patience and Melanie, have friends or have, acquaintances or people who would help guide you in terms of how to benchmark or how to go about projects. When it comes to, just putting the flow together of how projects would go, you start, of course, by scoping it out, giving timelines, saying these are the expectations and the KPIs. One other thing that I'd like to add, it's also very important for you to understand the capability of your team and align with that.
Great. I like that. Being aligned is something quite critical. And I think we take it so much for granted, yet it's, something that keeps on draining projects. So thanks for mentioning that, Claire. Patience, I'd love to hear from you. Assuming that, I've already onboarded a client with unrealistic expectations and we're already working together, what advice would you give me? How do I then deal with it when I'm already in that big pool of water?
I would maybe just urge whoever is in that situation to first maintain composure and just don't react compulsively, because a lot of the times when you're under so much pressure, maybe the client is there complaining that they're paying you to do a job that you're not delivering at, you should just first be composed and don't react compulsively, because a lot of the times that is what we as humans are inclined to do. Number two is just to try and see the bigger picture and focus on your shared goals, because at the beginning when you and that client were getting to start this whole work relationship, there were some things that you had discussed. There's something that they had shared with you that you thought you would do, or before things got messy, and there are certain goals that you want. Say you want to get paid, say you want to build your portfolio. Just see the bigger picture and don't get to be swayed away from that whole thing. And then even when trying to communicate maybe with this client, say you've gotten into trouble, maybe the conversion rates they were expecting are not giving. So maybe just like, again, going back to the bigger picture, and for even when communicating, even you're communicating these hurdles that you're experiencing, just showing that you're still trying to focus on the bigger picture and your both shared goals. This, when you're communicating a tough situation, this is going to give you leeway to communicate with them the practical realities on the ground. Maybe they wanted all these customers and all that, and then they're telling you to do that in a month. You can remind them, in as much as you are aiming for this number of customers, there's this and this that we have to first wait before we get to our end goal. Number three, I would maybe just acknowledge the expectations without labels. Sometimes everyone is just so quick to say how some things are unrealistic. But to be honest, every idea to one person what might be unrealistic, to another it's very doable. So if a client say you've gotten into business and then things start getting messy along the way, you should first acknowledge the expectations without any labels. Whether you can perform, whether you cannot, first just acknowledge that that is there. But can I do it? Those are the things to ask yourself without being so inclined to defending yourself. And then another thing I would advise a person in such a situation is to check to match the expectations on delivery. If you've been told, say we are going to be publishing 10 blog posts in a week, just check to see whether you can manage that. And maybe other, what are these? with all things given, with all the conditions, can you manage that? You check to see whether you match the expectations on delivery. And maybe the last thing I could tell someone in such a situation is to ask questions. Ask, especially for the digital marketing space. A lot of the things, they overlap, and maybe you're not so skilled in a certain thing. So you can create a website, but can you optimize it? Or maybe you can set up accounts, but how well can you do about the engagement? And so many things. So one thing is to ask questions. Ask. Don't get sad, don't get shy. Don't get scared, just ask. And then also lay out your plans. And maybe lay out your plans. This is going to give you a guide. So it is even going to give you pointers on what you can perform on or what you cannot. And then maybe you can advise your client whether you need an extra hire and all that. So those are some of the things I would tell someone who's already in a situation where they're having all this trouble.
Great. Thank you, Patience. I think my takeaway from that is don't be shy. And speaking of not being shy, Anne, as we wind up this conversation, I think I'd love to hear from you. Are there instances where you've gotten yourself dealing with such a difficult client who had such unrealistic expectations to the point where you had to say no, or enough is enough, let it stay? Have you found yourself in such a situation?
Yes, of course, I've had to let go some clients. It's never one of your desires, but I think there comes a point when you really have to think about your sanity and money. So my experience is what happened with this client is that the roles started adding up until it got to a point I had to ask for more money, and that is when now we had a heated conversation. Because when we first started working out, the contract was saying that I'll be managing 3 social media platforms. So it got to a point when they were doing their strategy, and the strategist advised them that it is best for their clientele to be on Pinterest and LinkedIn. So after that meeting, I remember the following week, the client asking me, so how are we performing on LinkedIn and Pinterest? And I told them, we are to discuss, we have not discussed about that, because that means our contract has to change, and I am supposed to, the pay of course will increase, and for something like LinkedIn, I'm not the one to create an account, you're the one to add me as an admin there. So it really brought, the client was so mad because they were like, why am I increasing money? It's part of social media management and all that. So when that month ended, just the day before she pays for the next month, I just told her I'll not be able to continue to be your social media manager and all that. So yeah, that's one time I had to let go of a client because of the expectations they had about me. And yes, it happens with some clients. You discuss that this is beyond my scope of work, but if we are to do this is to increase, the pay is to go higher, or we can work around something. So some clients understand, some clients don't understand. So I think you just have to be firm and also have boundaries. Not everything the client asks you to do, you say yes. For example, I have clients who, when they ask me, maybe I'm managing a restaurant for them, and then they ask me to design a menu. You see, now our clients will assume that is part of social media manager, but some understand that this is not your job. So how much are you charging to design this? But if in case a client wants something that is not within what was agreed, I think it's best you communicate to them and tell them that this comes, if you want to be good, well and good. You can tell them this one, I'll do it for free, because there's some things, will increase your client's presence, or there are those things that you can do for free personally. There are those things that I can do for free, but if it's something that will involve a lot of my time, energy, maybe I'll need to consult other people. I might ask the client to maybe pay up something. Yeah, so I think it's best to communicate and also have boundaries. Don't be saying yes to everything the client wants. Yes, that's my input.
Nice, thank you. Lots of lessons to pick from there. My favorite question, how much? Oh, you don't know how happy that question makes me. I love money. I'm not going to pretend. All of us do. And so
Yeah, true.
sometimes you have to do what you have to do for both your sanity, as well as just ensuring that you give the best to your client. So thanks for that. And maybe as we wind up, we can get some comments from Claire and Patience. I think I'll start with Claire. Give us an example from your career around, an unrealistic, a client that you manage who had unrealistic expectations, but you eventually managed to turn that into something positive.
I have a million examples.
Just one.
Surveys, but I'll just pick one. So of course, for client surveys, flexibility and being adaptable is the name of the game, right? I will speak to one example where we had a campaign where we were collaborating with, so there's the client and then there's the global tenet of it that speaks to what the client needs to do. And it was a Christmas campaign. Of course, around Christmas, everybody has different comms and you want yours to stand out and you have like your goals are way up here, but realistically what you can manage is down here. So how did I go about it? So first, I was very open with the client and I said, I'd like to hear your expectations. And we sat down in a meeting and they told me this is what, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is what we expect. And I'm like, okay, already I know by the time I leave that meeting, I know 1 can be, 2 is not, 3 is impossible. So I went back to my team. I asked, okay, guys, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How do we go about it? And the best part about working with creatives, I love this because they always think outside the box and they just don't think outside the box, they destroy the box. So some of the solutions that I got from the creative team, I didn't expect that they would actually work. But they said, guys, they told me, Claire, we can actually do this. Let's try it, but let's try it in this way. So instead of giving 50 still posts, we agreed to just narrow it down to 4 GIFs. From around 50 stills to 4 GIFs. And I went back to the client with that proposal and they were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, let's do that. Then also said, in addition to this 4 GIFs, we will have a lot of collaborations because of influencers. And you know how if the way to go these days, or especially on Instagram, is collaborating with an influencer and both your audiences get to see that content. And that was a second suggestion. So in addition to the 4 GIFs, let's do collaboration with influencers. That was not an objective, or it was not even an idea that the client thought about. But the outcome of it was really, really good because in a span of 2 days, 3 days, we got 1 million impressions and almost 700 to I think 600 reach, just because of destroying that box. And I like the fact that the digital space is so fluid. It gives you an array of things that you can always be able to tap into, even if they are not within that scope, but are aligned to your goals, so that it makes it flexible and adaptable to be able to reach what the end goal is.
Great. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Evan, for giving us that, wonderful example. Speaking of creatives destroying the box, Patience, as we wind up, we'd love to hear from you. What are some of the lessons, that you as Patience personally picked from an experience you've had or you've had someone else have when it comes to managing a client with unrealistic expectations? Are there any lessons to be picked, or, is it just one of those ones that just goes?
My line of work, I've had a few instances where a client had unrealistic expectations, and maybe something I could tell someone in a similar situation is to just let your skills and talents speak for themselves. Maybe you're in a case where your client is a micromanager, they're trying to do everything and they give you a task and still try to do everything. Just take no offense and don't take any offense and don't try to outperform the client. Just lay low and eventually let your skills and talents speak for themselves. And also for another instance, when I had a client with unrealistic expectations, sometimes I could get overwhelming feedback. And in those instances where I could get overwhelming feedback, like so much in one go, I would ask them to give me the feedback in manageable and digestible, in a manageable and digestible way, so that I couldn't make assumptions. And then there are instances where, again, I could get no feedback. So in these cases, I would ask for feedback early, often and directly. If maybe I've done a piece of work and I've not gotten any feedback, I will try to directly ask them what they think, and also try to be a feedback seeker constantly if I see this is a trend with this particular client. And also for another instance, there is one I had an unrealistic deadline. So for me, in that case, I was tempted a lot to whine and negotiate for more time or just start maybe blame shifting, but instead, I just decided to create a realistic timeline to start. And then a lot of times when I get such an unrealistic deadline, I try to overestimate the completion time. So again, I can have ample time. I better hand it in early than be late. And then where need be, I would put in extra time. Sometimes you could even work on weekends just to meet this deadline and just for your reputation's sake. You can put in extra time where necessary when you're having maybe such deadlines. And then another period where I had someone with some unrealistic tendencies is whereby you would do a piece of work and at the end of the day, they would take all the credit. They would say they gave you all the pointers, they give you this and that. But at the end of the day, for me, I just let my work shine anonymously. Sometimes I will, where need be, again, as I said, on the contract, you can negotiate, you can have a written agreement of public materials where you want to be acknowledged and etc. So my parting shot would be for everyone to just adopt resilience. Sometimes disruption and difficulty can bring positive outcomes and new opportunities.
Great. Thank you for that. When I grow up, I want to be as nice as you. Me, my work has to shine. But that's me. Thank you so much to my wonderful panelists. We've had such a great time with this conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights. I can see we have one question in the chat. Ian is asking, or rather he's also saying, I'm loving the conversation here. My question would be, how do you convince your client that a digital marketer and a salesperson are two different people? Some clients anticipate their sales to grow from you managing their accounts or running SEO on their websites, What they forget is we are only responsible for bringing in the numbers. The conversion part should be their sales team job. How do you politely point this out to them? I think I'll start, then we'll go to Anne first. But for me, I mean, you've said it well. That's the most polite way. Realistically, digital marketing is a journey. Your work as the marketer is to bring in quality traffic. And how that traffic is established as quality is ideally by the salesperson. Of course, let's be realistic. We're living in a world where small business owners exist. Maybe they don't have a salesperson. So who then ensures that quality is right? Ideally, it's you, by ensuring that your targeting is correct, sort of the right people are reaching out. But whatever happens between a client reaching out and the final conversion of them purchasing the product, honestly, is a little bit way within your control, simply because anything could happen. You might be bringing traffic and your client responds after 48 hours. I've already gotten another solution. You could also be bringing traffic, but your client is one of those ones for DM for prices, which turns many people off. So I think the simplest way to say it is explain the customer journey from a digital marketing perspective to your client and help them understand that it's a team effort. There's what you as the marketer does until a certain point. Then there's what ideally the salesperson or the sales process ideally does for the rest. I think for me, that's what I would say. Maybe you can hear from Anne, and then Patience, and then finalize with Claire.
Repeat the question. Sorry, Melanie.
How do you tell a client that as a digital marketer, you are not exactly responsible for their sales? Ideally, it's the salesperson's job.
Well, this is a hard one because I think all clients assume my role is to bring in sales because they will always complain like, I'm not selling, and what this. Anyway, that's good. I think this is a constant tug of war between marketing and sales. Most clients think it is one and the same thing, but I think it's clarifying to your client that your work is not sales, and your work is only to create content that will in turn attract potential clients and buyers. So one of the thing is a client cannot fully rely on social media to bring them clients. They also need to be involved, like, for example, hire salespeople. Maybe themselves, they also need to speak about what they do in their pages. They should join other groups as well, join other network of communities of people in the same industry. So they cannot rely on me as Anne only posting on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok to bring in clients. It's a two-way thing. So when a client raises it, one of the things is I advise them on what to do. For example, maybe do ads, maybe we do influencer marketing, maybe we do partnerships with other people, collaborations and such. You can suggest to clients what else can be done to increase the sales apart from now digital marketing, because sometimes you can even do the ads and the ads might not convert. So of course, you also need the client to get money to pay you. So you cannot just sit there and say, hey, for me, it's just creating content and posting it. Sales is not my business. You also need to find out ways in which your client can make more sales. Are there expos coming that you think your client can make something from it? Are there exhibitions coming up? Are there events where you think your client can pay and be part of? It's as much as you're in the digital marketing space for your client, you can also suggest ways that can increase their revenue. And I think that is one of the value add that we as digital marketers can give to our clients. Let me stop there because I can talk until tomorrow. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I love that you've even called it a value add, because I mean, that's exactly what it is. Claire, anything to add on to that conversation and that question?
Yes, just like I could speak about this forever. I'll just outline it very simple. First of all, acknowledge the expectation. 2, educate the roles and the responsibilities that are for each party. 3, highlight collaboration that has already been said. 4, setting a realistic expectation such that even from the word go, you are already outlining the difference between sales and what you do. Then, of course, offering support and guidance, and also just showing the effectiveness of that teamwork. So just like has been said before, outlining that consumer journey. One thing that I'd like to add, you can also give examples and case studies so that you are able to illustrate, paint a very clear picture in terms of the differences between sales and marketing. Then lastly, dialogue for questions so that you have an environment where it doesn't become a point of friction, but you're able to address any concerns that they may have and be open to further those discussions. So in a nutshell, it's approaching the conversation with professionalism, empathy, and a focus of collaboration, because by clearly outlining the roles and responsibility for each of these parties, then you're able to emphasize on teamwork and how it will work.
Great, amazing. Emphasizing on teamwork and how it will work. Final comments from patients? Anything to add on?
Before
Oh,
you
hello.
take on,
Hi.
yeah,
Oh, sorry, Jen, just 1 minute. Patients, any final comments?
so I was saying before you take on particular role, just try and check the job description and if you're a good fit. And then another thing would be to be clear on your value proposition. Say maybe it's just to help with the digital aspect of the business. Be clear on that and be very vocal about that as well. And another thing is to differentiate the different overlapping marketing roles and try to negotiate. You know, if you started out as digital marketing and they're still expecting you to double up as a salesperson, and also even maybe on extremes, they expect you to then go on again on ground, not just within, but even beyond. You can just try and negotiate again. Let them know that if we add this aspect of the work, we are going to have a different pay, or if we have to do all this, you can just still negotiate about the whole thing. And maybe the final thing is to gauge, just based on the organizational culture, you can gauge if there's a possibility that the roles are going to overlap. Just gauge and just know how you can manage to handle the situation. I'm sure first studying the culture and all that, you can manage to see, can I even manage to handle this? Do I have the capacity to go beyond this? Just gauge the organizational culture. For me, those are the things that I would say I could add on that.
Great. Thank you for that. I think I'll just leave the floor for some 2 more minutes for any questions or comments. Jane, I know you had admitted yourself. You had something to say?
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you. It's more of a comment than a question. It would be nice to hear from you. I think probably not addressed in this session, maybe maybe it could be a topic for another session. when anyone, especially who is operating in the digital space, either as a social media, either in social media or digital marketing, the thin line between what's nowadays ethical and unethical, and sometimes when the unethical is coming from being pushed by a client. So I think that would be interesting to hear people's thoughts. What's ethical and what's unethical, especially in the digital space, with regards to sharing of information, consent, privacy, confidentiality, and all those.
Thank you for that, Jen.
Yes, thank you.
We are having an event in May, I think, beginning of May, around ethical dilemmas. We'll get to dive into that a little bit more. But in the meantime, if you're in any of the WhatsApp groups, feel free to slap that question there and let's see how the conversation goes in preparation for that event. I'll post a link on the chat with some of the free events that we have coming in case you don't know about them yet. Anyone can sign up, but thank you for that, Jane. Well noted, and we'll definitely tackle it at another time. So I think for now, that is it. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining in. Apologies for extending time a little bit because we kicked off late. Thank you once again to my wonderful panelists. Thank you everyone for engaging in one way or another. You can write in the chat in one word, how do you feel after today's session? I can see Francis saying powerful. I said empowered. Ian has said motivated. Such great words. So we'll see you at the next event. Thank you again so much for joining in. The recording will be available. So for those who didn't join in or you joined in late, you are definitely going to receive that via email. So thank you so much once again. Have a lovely, lovely evening. Bye.
Bye, Melanie. Thank you for having me.
Most welcome.
Thank you, Melanie, for a very, very good session.
Amazing. Thank you for being a part, Claire, Patience, and Anne. And thank you to our wonderful audience.